Sorry, I still have to count on fingers to see how it all count everyone of the attendees. So it looks like everyone's here. And so we're going to go ahead and get started. So thank you all for joining today. I'm sure that more people will be joining us as we get going. Today we're presenting an interesting panel. I'm really excited to see what comes of this and perseverance of research activity. And the theme is, I think you all know, for University Research Week this year is perseverance. And certainly we've all had to persevere during the pandemic. But the theme, we thought we'd focus today on individual perseverance, particularly the fact that we have lives outside of our professional commitments and how we navigate and manage those. I know personally, I was, when we discussed this in our administrative directors meeting about this as a theme, I reflected a lot on the challenges that I think we've all gone through, and particularly over the last year has been a lot of ebbs and flows. But we're going to hear from examples of perseverance that predates the pandemic, and just kind of look for stories and opportunities for shared learning and inspiration, but also resources that can be helpful. So I'm really interested in seeing how this all comes together today. So what I think what we're going to do is, I'm Mark Holmes, I'm the director of the Shep Center. I'll introduce each of our panelists one by one as they present, rather than introducing them all at the beginning. They'll all have an opening statement, for lack of a better term, but just say a couple words to sort of kick us off, and then we'll have some moderated discussion and look forward to questions from the group. So the first member of the panel today is Dr. Brianna Lombardi. She's an assistant professor in family medicine and holds a secondary appointment in the School of Social Work, and is the deputy director of the Carolina Health Workforce Research Center at the Shep Center. Her work focuses on understanding of the workforce needed to implement integrated and team-based healthcare. She joined the faculty this past summer and is the mother of 2 kids, age 2 and age 2 months, which is a great foreshadow of what Brianna's theme will be touching on. So Dr. Lombardi, please take it away.
Thank you. I'm going to share my slides, which is just a simple excuse to share pictures of my children. 1 second. And again, I want to just say thank you for having this talk, for inviting me. Certainly this is a personal talk to give and to share with you all, but Carolina was the place that I got my PhD, and so it definitely feels like home. And although I've been away for a few years at another institution, I was able to return this past summer during a very, a difficult time in our country and in our world. So the picture on the left is, 1 week into the pandemic, where, staying at home with your 9-month-old is still cool and interesting. And then pan to just this last week. Well, I have 2 children, and that little kid on the left has grown up into a very energetic little one on the right. And so just wanted to really share with you about my experiences. And again, we often don't have the opportunities to talk about things behind our research. So like Mark mentioned, I'm the deputy director of the Health Workforce Research Center. I'm a social worker by training, and I enjoy engaging in research focused on how interprofessional integrated health teams enhance health equity and address physical, social, and behavioral health outcomes. But so often when I'm in front of folks, I don't really talk about my kids or my family. But through the pandemic, I came to the realization that I don't want to hide my full being, I guess, as well as, I want to be able to expand my work by including, every part of me. But I had actually had a conversation this morning with a colleague too, that really highlighted that the pandemic really like showed all of us each other's families. We were zoomed into each other's homes. We saw each other's cats come across the screen. We saw our kids, flying in the background. And so in some ways, the pandemic has revealed what's always been there, which is that we are parents and caregivers and mostly humans. And I hope that the progress we've made of really thinking about families, and that us researchers are caregivers and parents and new parents, can remain. But I'm not going to lie, and you all know this, it was really hard. It was really, really hard. And so the picture on my left is me in my office hours, waiting for my students to come in. And the picture on my right, my partner actually captured this moment. I'm busy at work and my kid is running around. And you can see my house is a mess. And that was real life. And through all of that, I really did kind of want to just kind of put out some things that helped me along the way, or and things many of you, we could all have a conversation about. But really, there was no really life hacks. It was really hard. But there were some things that helped me get through that. And a lot of it was having this acknowledgement that I'm not alone, connecting with other junior faculty who might be new parents or caregiving, connecting with mentors and senior faculty. Childcare is fundamental to the work that we do, and something, you hear a lot in the news, but also really impacts us. But kind of more of these broader feelings is that, and oftentimes in academia and research, we are taught that it can only be done in one way. We follow one path, one linear path, and there's only one way to do that. But in reality, for a lot of us, it feels like do not enter if you're not going to follow that one path or that one way. And so really thinking about how the messaging that we give, where we're not acknowledging our families or acknowledging our life outside of work, limits our ability to open the field to so many different people with different abilities and different family formations and different life experiences. And so really kind of the pandemic pushed me forward to acknowledge that timing is a myth. There's never a good time. It's never a good time in the middle of the pandemic to have a baby and move cross country and start a new job. But you can do it. There's nothing special about my experience that it's other than just having the kind of refusal that I can either grow a family or continue on in my research and my work. And I wanted to do both. And I'm thankful for the mentors who supported me to do both. And I somewhat self-selected into a team that does support that. And it is extremely important. So I think that's it. No more fun pictures of my kids. But thank you for listening to me.
All right, thank you. Next up is Dr. Sherry Green. Dr. Green's an associate professor in maternal and child health in the Gilling School. She's also a research fellow at SHEPS, has recently led a $2 million ARC-funded grant that trained clinicians on how to treat opioid addiction and also in nursing homes with how to deal with COVID over the past year. Dr. Green.
Thank you, Dr. Holmes, for the invitation. And Brianna, I love the slides. I'd like to borrow that list. Like Dr. Lombardi, I also have I have 2 degrees in social work, and it was my minor for my PhD in maternal and child health. And that's important because I was a mid-career return to get my doctorate. I was very busy working in women's substance abuse treatment in the Western counties. And I came back to get my degree in maternal and child health. And 4 months after I finished my PhD, my grandmother got sick, who I was very close with. And I was told she had 6 months to live. And I stepped in and, brought her home with me and did all the things that we do. I went from maternal and child health to become an expert in elder care, navigating rehabs and hospitals and doctors and getting care from Duke and from UNC. I brought her to Durham to live with me and eventually got her back home using my social work advocacy skills. And 12 years later, she passed away. So it was a really important process for me to decide who would I be if I abandoned this important matriarch of my family, this mentor, if I didn't use the skills I had been pursuing with my own family. Not that I was going to be her therapist, but my advocacy skills. And I will tell you that there were many instances, had I not been sitting in that nursing home or in that hospital, she would have been killed by med mistakes and other mistakes. And I went on to witness it happen with other family members. I then stepped in. My grandfather begged me to take over so his son wouldn't put him in a nursing home. And I stayed as his advocate for about 10 months. And so they died at 89 and 90. So the ripe old age, we used every resource we had to keep them home. And I was able to get in-home care, but I want to say that I burned up a lot of highway between Chapel Hill and Western North Carolina. I would cram in as many hours as I could. I would get in a car, drive for long weekends, and drive back trying to stay awake and keep my grants up and going. And somewhere in the early stages of that, I gave up a tenure track position to come back to UNC. And I have been a self-funded research faculty. I've had an over 35-year academic career. And if some of you know, if you don't have grants, you don't have a job. So there was this simultaneous pressure. It provided some flexibility for me to choose what I was doing, but it created its own kind of pressure. So there was no such things as holiday breaks, because that's usually when I was catching up on grading or writing papers or working on the next grant application. And about the time I was trying to settle my grandparents' estate, my mom got really sick. So then I entered a 6-year journey again, not there as a full-time caregiver, but all of my spare time. So it's had an impact certainly on my career, on the choices I made about not leaving state when I had other opportunities. It had an impact on relationships. I don't have children, but the consequence of this has been 18 years of elder caregiving or being an advocate, a primary advocate. My mother just passed away 2 weeks ago after a home hospice stay. And, I don't know who, like many of you, once your kids go, I have a kind of an empty nest syndrome. It's like, now what? So it's probably the first time in my career that I'm not struggling for funding. And I have a chance to maybe reset and focus in a different way on scholarship. I do want to highlight that tension between values and the demands. And I would say that people who aren't in academia really don't get it. They don't understand why I'm having to check my phone and my email. And it is a constant struggle to not feel guilty, on the other hand, give as much as you can. Also, I went from being trained in maternal and child health, as a friend said, I became a death doula, marching 3 people to the curtain, as she said, so, and there's a lot learned for me about the undoing of life. It very much mirrors the starting, whether you're learning to walk and feed and go to the bathroom and all those things, and you watch it come undone on the other end. It also impacted my research. As Mark mentioned, most of my career has been in perinatal maternal substance abuse, but during the pandemic, our team was awarded a large grant from UNM and ARC to train nursing home providers about evidence-based practice. And I will say that my personal experience certainly led me down that path, as well as some of the techniques we've been using. And I developed a whole new cadre of colleagues who really just did a phenomenal job. So I'll wrap up by just saying that, there was a pretty good study, I think in 2018, it was a review of about 27 papers that came out of the UK looking at caregivers and resilience. And, they said positive coping is life affirming, health affirming. But what is true when you are exhausted, it's really easy to surf the net blindly or turn on the whatever movie you could do or fighting sleep. And I think that whatever we can do to help our colleagues or as a university with some of those things, focusing on sleep and nutrition and exercise. And I think when you're stretched, when you're working on tenure or that next grant, how do you actually have time for those social connections outside of the just minimum? And I think that those are absolutely essential when it's a marathon and not just a sprint. So that's all. I think I'm at probably my 5 minutes mark, but I'm happy to take questions later.
Great, thank you, Sherry. And then we have, I think it's Dr. Drake is presenting, but we have two representatives from a resource on campus that I think will be helpful to hear from. And I'm sorry, I got two screens already and it's too many notes. But Dr. Amelia Drake is the Associate Dean for Faculty Development in the UNC School of Medicine, Office of Faculty Affairs. Her roles include oversight of a number of programs developed to enhance their faculty careers. These include Caregivers at Carolina, the Academic Career Leadership Academy in Medicine, and the Association of Women in the Professional Sciences. And Dr. Susan Girdler is a professor and vice chair of faculty development in Department of Psychiatry. She's the co-program director of the School of Medicine Caregivers at Carolina program, and an NIH-funded clinical researcher in reproductive mood disorders and PI of an NIH U01 research study, the PROMISE study, which seeks to identify best mentoring practices for early career underrepresented biomedical researchers. And I think Dr. Drake is presenting. Did I get that right? A 50-50 chance. All right.
I'm presenting for both on behalf of both of us. And I just want to say thank you to Crystal, Cena, and others who envisioned this panel. I love the title of Perseverance. I will need to talk fast because I have way over 15 minutes, but I will not read the slides. I will just put them up, and that should get me down to the 6 or 7 minutes. But on behalf of both of us, and you can see we included some pictures. My son, Connor, the recent PhD grad at the School of Public Health, had a baby recently, and that's on the right. So that makes me a grandmother, hard to say. And on the left, I had my mother-in-law pass during COVID. There's the dog coming up and checking on her in our home. So I think our lives are surrounded by caregiving. It's something we do without talking about it. It's something that we love that we do. But Susan and I some years ago said, what can we do to help establish a culture that supports caregivers? We're doctors and researchers and, scientists in many ways. Do I say next slide? I guess I don't advance them. Sorry, Lindsay. So next slide. Yeah, oh, thank you, Mark. So this was a call for proposals in 2015 from the Doris Duke Research Fund to help retain clinical scientists. And they really saw this as an area where they wanted to invest some money. And they asked for people to submit, for institutions to submit proposals. Susan and I submitted a proposal and were one of 10 awardees as a medical school for this Caregivers grant. And then we had money to distribute to our caregivers, meaning our clinician scientists. It's very specific, junior faculty with caregiving responsibilities. There were 60 institutions that applied, 10 got that award. And what they were trying to do is keep people from leaving academic medicine. Next. The early findings from their fund, because this became an interest in some of the people at Doris Duke Research Foundation, was they really wanted to advance clinical research in an inclusive but not gender neutral way. I think I'm trying to say gender neutral way. Enable recipients to repurpose their time and validate rather than reinforce stigma around caregiving. So what you said earlier is, I think we were encouraging our faculty to claim their roles. It makes them better clinicians, right? So let's go to the next slide. I won't read all of these slides or it's going to take way too long, but the COVID pandemic exacerbated the pressures. And recently they had an additional call for funds for 30 medical schools to get some additional support. And we're waiting to talk about that because that result of that granting period is still embargoed, that results, but I can tell you there will be an announcement next week. I think that's all I can say about that, but to really help some of our clinicians with caregiving demands during COVID. Next slide. Hopefully I didn't say too much. But as I said, in 2016, we were one of 10 institutions to receive funds. Susan and I co-direct this program. We've gotten to know wonderful people like Crystal Sine and others who have really enriched the program themselves. We can't do everything for them that they've done for each other. And then we submitted a competitive renewal in 2020 and was one of the institutions that got an additional 3 years. So next slide. So the purpose of the program is to support research productivity and retention of early physician scientists with caregiving responsibilities. And it's hard to know what is considered extreme caregiving, because we all know how hard it can be just to take care of a normal newborn or a normal person at the end of life, like my mother-in-law last year. I mean, you know, it's all of that takes time, effort, love, and the kind of things that our other panelists have been discussing. Next slide. You guys, good. We're making good time. I won't go till after 5, like I was suspecting. But anyway, this is how the program works. They encourage earlier career physician scientists because they want to eliminate the egress from academia and academic research. They want people to have some of their own funding. You can use the funding for a variety of reasons, including technicians or buyout of some clinical time. But what Susan and I did, and I'm referring to Susan Girdler, who's also introduced, was really have a number of shared resources. So anyone who applies is part of our caregivers cohort. And to that group, we give some, not just networking when they get together, but some manuscript help. We developed some travel funds. The scholars get together and sometimes envision research projects that are collaborative. So we've really done well with that part of our envisioned cohort. And I think that's made us a little different from some of the other schools who bury this program within HR and say, well, if you have, you know, you're about to leave, please go talk to HR. There may be some money, you know, that type of a thing. So next slide. In addition to monetary support, I mentioned formatting of manuscripts and references, production of tables and graphs. So people are getting help to write new research proposals or re-edit to a journal specification or reformat references, all the things that take you so much time, but don't necessarily give you a lot of reward. Next slide. We are held to the eligibility of junior faculty, so they will allow associate professors, but only in the first year. These people need to have caregiving demands as well as be conducting clinical research per the terms of the Doris Duke grant. And of course, we encourage physician scientists from underrepresented groups to apply. Next. So I'm just going to give you a few of the faces and you can read their quotes yourself. But this is Christina Cruz from this past year's awardee. She's in the Department of Psychiatry, Susan's department, and is talking about how important it is to have some quality time with her family. Next. This is Ross Boyce. He's an infectious diseases doctor, and you can see that we include men in our program. There are more women than men that define themselves as caregivers, but certainly we have a number of dads / caregiving dads as part of our cohort. So he's talking about how important it is to do things with your kids versus always meeting your deadlines with your grants. He actually says kids appearing on Zoom is usually a healthy movement of levity for all involved. And I think that's what COVID has given us, a new appreciation for exactly what Brianna and you guys talked about. It's, you know, a child, a cat, someone wanders across the screen. That is very acceptable. Who knew? But it is. Next slide. This is Kia Sanderson. She's a pediatric nephrologist to take care of the kidneys. She's talking about expectations, do what you can, but what you do accomplishes enough. She's not meant to hustle every minute of every day. A rested mind and body can accomplish more than a weary one. So that was a very well stated quote. Next. And here's Melissa Bowserman. She's from the Department of Pediatrics. I think this is the last quote I have. She applied with the first, I think she and Crystal probably were colleagues in this program, and she realized that the constant need of productivity was leading her to burnout. I believe she was maybe pregnant with her third child when her husband was deployed, and she was covering stents of little premature babies in the NICU. So that's the type of scenario that people find themselves. Next. So some of this is duplicative of what I've said. All of our caregivers have access to the administrative support. When travel was possible, or hopefully it will be again, we try to support that because not everyone has that in their home department, has support for the type of meetings that they think will develop them. Susan has really been more involved even than I in terms of being a mentor to many of these caregivers. We have in-person meetings because many times that peer mentor or that peer support is so valuable. Next. And then you can read this. I put in a lot of quotes, but she's talking about a neurodiverse child and how with COVID, suddenly everything screamed to a halt. So then you're taking care of a sick child, but you're also trying to work, and your child doesn't have the kinds of school-based and health-based services that they had previously. So really, really COVID affected caregivers in a extreme way. Next. So this COVID fund is $550,000 over the next 2 years. I can't say anything about it yet, but we feel that we're in a good position to really look for recipients for these additional funds. Next. Oh, and then I included some references because I'll just read the titles. This one that Susan and I have participated with. This one's an innovative program to support gender equity and success in academic medicine. So I think the Doris Duke Foundation wants to claim, that they're working on gender equity and success. It's a very lofty and wonderful goal. Go to the next reference. There are about 3 of them. This one's called The Most Valuable Resource is Time. And I think that was what they got out of all their interviews with many of the recipients, a novel national program to improve retention of physician scientists. Next. And maybe last, is this the last one? Yes. From stigma to validation, a qualitative assessment of was that the last slide? Did I read that twice? I think that's it. So the truth is that the people that have been studying the recipients and the program have found that this does have an effect on caregivers. It helps them get rid of some of their nonsense work and concentrate on the work that's important. So thank you so much. And I gave this talk on behalf of myself and Susan Gerther.
Great, thank you. Lindsay, don't put those slides too far away because I know we're going to want to go back to them as a resource, I think, during the discussion.
Yep.
Our final speaker is Dr. Crystal Cena. She's an associate professor in the Division of General Medicine and Clinical Epi in the UNC School of Medicine and an executive director for health equity with UNC Health. At the Shep Center, Dr. Cena is the Deputy Director for Research and Director of the Program in Health Disparities Research, or PRIDE, which I think she wins a prize for a very clever acronym or whatever word that is for that. Her work and life's passion for clinical care and research was influenced by her personal experiences with family members experiencing complex chronic health conditions. And Dr. Cena wins the award for, UNC, we get a lot of people migrating across the country, but it's rare you see someone who grew up, 10 miles from one ocean and is moving to 10 miles from the other ocean, going from Sneed's Ferry in Onslow County to San Diego in January. So we won't forgive her for her move to San Diego, but Dr. Cena, happy to hear from you.
All right. Thanks, Mark. I will definitely miss it. I'm a North Carolina girl at heart, so this will always be home. But thanks for the opportunity to talk. So much of what has been said already resonates with me. Sherry, I definitely resonate with a lot of what you said, having been a caregiver for my child. I had a preemie at 27 weeks, and Melissa Bowserman actually took care of my son in the NICU and was also caring for my grandmother at that time and also have been a caregiver for my mom, who spent about 5 months at UNC hospitals. So, and those were kind of happening around the time that I applied for the first cohort of the Caregivers at Carolina program. So definitely I'm appreciative of Amelia and Susan for all of their work. It's a fabulous program. Happy to answer any questions. I can't even tell you how much support is available through that program and how helpful it is. I have used it, the help with working on manuscripts or preparing for grant proposals, and also getting travel awards when there's money left over. All of that stuff makes a difference. And it's very few programs where if you don't win the grant or the prize, you still get the support. And so I think that's what makes it really unique. And of course, your colleagues who are in it with you. We didn't get to talk about Promise, but Susan leads a very amazing research study, the Promise study, that I was really proud and just honored to be a mentor for. And we'd love to talk about that as well. I wish we would have time, because that's a great program. I just wanted to make 3 points, I think. And again, I just want to couch all this by saying I'm talking about me. None of this may apply to you all, but this is what I've learned about this, just kind of this trying to integrate, or however we want to call this thing that some people refer to as balance, which I hate because I don't think it is balance. But for me, the first thing I've learned about myself, and this is a process of evolution, is that there is a sort of a very perverse and elusive nature of time. So for me, I have realized I've spent a lot of time thinking about what drives me to work so much and to work so hard and to feel like I have to do this. And when people ask me, I'm like, oh, well, I've got to do this. I've got to do this. I've got to do this. And I had a person in my personal life who said, who's making you do all those things? And she actually happens to be an academic at UNC, but she's kind of a life coach for me and has training in life coaching. And I thought, what do you mean who's making me? The place, the system. And she really challenged me to think about who is making me do all these things. And so I realized that there is a reward that drives us, right? Parenting is hard. I am a single parent, and I take care of my kid, and I take care of my mom who's disabled. And so I'm an academic at heart. I love to read. I love to write. So doing my work, which think I'm good at, and I get rewarded for, I know exactly what I need to do to be rewarded for this. So that's much easier for me to do in a lot of ways. And I'm just going to be real honest with y'all, because that's just kind of how I am. For people who know me, it's easier for me to get rewarded for that than the messiness of parenting and the disappointment of disappointing my child or disappointing my family. But I can sit down and I can write an article, or I can write a grant, and I get rewarded for that, and I know how to get rewarded for it. So a lot of times I use work. There's no one making me. There's no external force, right? Yeah, we want to get tenured and pass that hurdle, but then I have to really ask myself, what's driving that? And so I think that there is some sort of more deep internal work that we, or at least that I have to do to help me figure out, why am I doing this? And when I say that the time is sort of perverse and elusive, is that I often think, oh my God, I don't have enough time to get my work done. And if I just keep working, I'll finish these things on my checklist. And so I'll keep working through dinner, won't cook, won't do stuff that I need to do for my family. I'm just going to be honest, because I'm thinking, if I can just finish this, paper, then I'll have the time to be a fantastic mom, to be a great daughter. But yet I don't realize that the same time that I feel like I don't have enough of, I feel like I have plenty of that to be a good mom after I get these other things done, right? So on the one hand, I don't have enough time, but on the other hand, I think I have plenty of time to be a parent. And the reality is I don't, but I make deliberate choices. And so I have to grapple with that for myself, because there's really no external driver. And so I think for me, the thing has been helpful is to sort of put it into perspective. There's always work we're going to have to do. You're never done. But trust me, even as I say that right now, I'm looking at my list and I'm thinking, I could knock 5 of these out today if I just keep working until they're done. Even though intellectually, I know that even if I knock those 5 things out, there are still 10 more things that I haven't put on the list yet. But I have a window of time with my child, and it's short. You know, the days are long, but the years are short. I have a window of time, and I have to make decisions about how I want to spend that. And so for me, it's really more of an internal work that I have to do. And that it's hard, but I prioritize the thing that I know I'm going to get rewarded for rather than the thing that's hard sometimes. So I have to stop that. I think the second big thing, again, because as I told you, I love to read. So I'm always reading books about how to, do all these things that I want to do. So I read this book a few years ago that's called 2 Awesome Hours. And it's basically by this person who has a PhD, Josh Davis, and it's science-based strategies to kind of harness, the best time and get the most out of your work and to get things done. And when I first read that book, I think it was one of those, how you're flying in the airport and it's like, I have a long layover and I see this. I'm like, okay, that'll be good. I buy it. And and I always like books by scholars because I think they're more credible for some reason, but that's my bias. And so one of the things that it talks about in this book is that, just try to create conditions that allow you to get 2 hours of peak productivity. And when I first started reading this, I was so skeptical. I said, who is this guy, right? Like in an 8-hour workday, you're saying all you need is 2 hours? Like what a slacker. And I really thought, I'm going to put this down because this guy clearly can't be credible. And then when I started taking a very disciplined approach to my own calendar, I took a leave of absence for 1.5 years and worked at RTI, which was really interesting because everything there is built on productivity and you have to log your time meticulously because everything gets charged to a charge code. Now, as a scholar through the RTI Scholars Program, I was like, we were the only ones who didn't have to log our time. But I decided while I'm there, I'm going to try to fit into the RTI mold and really calculate my time. And what I realized, and around this time, a little after this, I was reading this book, what I realized was that this book was right. Like, it is very hard to get 2 highly productive hours because a lot of your time is just spent answering emails or doing small things. And then you could go through a whole day, or I go through a whole day. And I look back and I think, what did I really get done today? And all those big things on my to-do list are still there, yet I have been busy all day long. And so I do think that there's something about figuring out what do you need to get done each day. And now I literally limit to 1 thing a day. And it sounds crazy and people could think I'm a slacker. I don't know. But I've realized that when I stop putting all these things on my list and really try to figure out, can I get 2 hours a day? And honestly, a lot of days I can't get 2 productive hours. That's the key, that it really does take a lot of intentionality. So the point there is just try to figure out, like, where can can we narrow our list? Can we really just pick 1 thing to accomplish each day? 1 thing that actually matters. And the third thing that I'll highlight that I have learned is, and a friend of mine actually helps me with this. She always says, remember the power of your yes. And so for me, I'm the type of person that some people on this call, I think Becky White is still up here, have been a recipient of of the way I work. I tend to be pretty detail oriented. I'm very into process. I think when I have to edit people's work, I'm going to spend as much time giving you feedback as you spent writing the grant. So people love to have me read their stuff and to help them because I really pour everything into it because I enjoy that, right? But what I realize is that I do that for everything. And so when I say yes, I'm going to go fully in. And so a lot of times I can get so tied up doing all of these things that don't probably need all of that, that I don't get things done. And so if I overcommit, which I often do, then I'm like stressed out and I can't get all of this stuff done. And so then I feel like a failure. And then that drives a certain level of avoidance because I don't want to do, but I'm never going to like, usually will not back out of something that I've already agreed to do. But you can see it becomes a vicious cycle. And then the backdrop of that, it's my family who suffers because I know they're always going to be there, right? So when my kid is like, Mommy, can you play with me? And I'm like, hold on, Braxton, I'll be done. I'll be done in just a few minutes. And that few minutes turns into a few hours. And then he's gone to bed. And then I feel guilty. So then I avoid, and it becomes this vicious cycle. But for me, the people that are closest to me are the ones who generally suffer because I take for granted that they're always going to be there, that I'm always going to have that time. And again, that goes back to point number one. There's this very perverse and elusive nature, kind of this dual-sided reality of time for me. So I'd say, practice strategic incompetence, which is a term I saw in this book. And it's not that we're incompetent, but it's that when we decide to let things go and to say no to things, it can feel like we're being incompetent or we're concerned that others will perceive that we're incompetent. And so that requires a lot of discipline. But for me, I am really have been on this quest to do that more, is to remember to always remind myself the power of my yes. And so when I need to really say yes to the right things. Otherwise, if I say yes to everything, then I'm overwhelmed, I'm overcommitted. And the people who are going to suffer are always going to be the people closest to me. I'm never going to let my colleagues down. I'm always going to let my family down. And so that's hard to admit, but I think you just have to tell the truth, right? So I'm really striving to be a truth teller as it relates to kind of this topic. And so I think, again, with that, it's just trying to leverage. I've been trying to do a better job of leveraging like my mental energy to do a few things that really matter instead of a lot, and be excellent at a few things as opposed to being, moderate or okay at a whole bunch of different things. Another book or resource that I would definitely recommend that my executive coach from the Robert Wood Johnson Clinical Scholars Program suggested was this book called Essentialism, and it's the disciplined pursuit of less. That's kind of the subtitle. So the book is called Essentialism, the disciplined pursuit of less, by Greg McKeown. And that book has really like changed a lot of things for me, even to the point where my team in the health system, the team that I lead there, I made everybody read it. Well, made loosely, right? But I had everybody read it as a book club, because we need to think about applying these strategies in our teams as well, not just for us individually, but it helps shape the work that we do when we're leading teams. What are we going to focus on, and how do we decide, and that kind of thing. So that's been really helpful. And I think the last thing I'll say is it's really important. It's been really important for me to be anchored to something, especially with COVID. It's taught us if you're not anchored, if there's not something that's your true north, you're going to be like crazy in the midst of everything. So for me, that's my faith, hands down. My prayer group, I go to a prayer group. We pray for the kids in our school. It's a moms in prayer group every Wednesday morning. And then I go to a Bible study, kind of a women's group, Wednesday evenings. And it's non-negotiable. I don't miss it. And I haven't for, 7 years. And so I think it's important to have an anchor and a community outside of work who can hold you accountable. So that's really been helpful for me too, is to have people who are not academics who can help me stay grounded and realize that while this is important, the stuff that we do is important, our work, it's not the end all be all. And we can all drop dead or decide to retire or leave. And the work is really going to continue, to be honest. People may miss you, and hopefully they'll remember you or say nice things, but they're going to get somebody to fill your spot and life is going to go on. But that's not the same with your kids and with your community and the people that matter for you. You matter to them. So find an anchor and let that kind of ground you. But I will stop there. I've talked too much.
Thanks, Crystal. I think the strategic incompetence is, my wife uses that phrase to refer to me an awful lot. I'm well familiar with that. If you have comments or questions, you can use the raise hand button or just put them in the chat. I do encourage you to use the raise hand button. I think that works better. So as we're waiting for questions from the group, all of you touched on a general theme, and I'm mindful it's being recorded, but hopefully this won't come back and bite me. When I saw the title for the University Research Week of Perseverance, I was a little off put, I guess, a little bit, because to me, it was championing people put their heads down and just bear through it. And, we just got it done. And that's the Carolina way, is to just push through and solve it, which I think is sort of the antithesis of what we've been hearing today. And all of you touched in one way or another on a notion of, I think it was Amelia, Dr. Drake, who really hit it best, the stigma kind of question. How do we pivot from away from the stigma of saying, I can't do this, it's too much, I need something. And whether that's mentoring from a senior, someone who's gone through this before, resources at Caregivers at Carolina, accommodations, extensions on deadline, whatever it is hard to do that in this culture where we're championing the latest grant, the being productive and counting things all the time we do. My son is still playing in the high school soccer playoffs. We're round 4 next tomorrow. And on Monday, I had to miss a fellowship meeting that I helped direct. And it was really hard to write to that group, and a couple of them are on this call, to say, I am not going to be there because I'm going to this soccer game instead. And it was, that's a very small thing, but this is not a place that generally rewards that kind of behavior. So to all 5 panelists, and you can sort out who answers first, I guess, how do we, yes, thank you, Crystal, that's totally on it. How do we change that culture? And whether that's managers, senior mentors, being the ability to set the standard and say, this is the example I want to set. I'm thinking of Brianna mentioning that she self-selected into a team that she saw was going to really value that. What can we do to make that pivot and make it less about just getting your nose down, Carolina grit, the John Henryanism, and instead being a place where people embrace that balance, that blend? So Sherry, go ahead.
Yeah, I really appreciate that that example, Mark. I would say even early in my career, prior to becoming a full-time academic, I was single, or I didn't have kids, and wasn't married, and my colleagues working on these community problem-solving grants had kids and had vacation, and they would take time off, and that was acceptable. It was socially acceptable and rewarded. But as a single person, non-parent in the group, the expectation was I would pick up the slack. And I don't mean to sound bitter, but I turned 58 today, and I've spent my entire career with that pressure. As a woman, as in a non-traditional family. And I would say that while I have certainly appreciated the support that I've had from my colleagues and people who could help take up the slack, Lindsay, big shout out to you, and Mark, in this last year, I, over this long haul, what Amelia or Dr. Drake highlighted, that incredible resource is only for a very small part of our community. I wouldn't qualify for that. And I, as a research faculty, if I don't have grants, I don't have a job. And so I don't know how I wouldn't have survived had I not done that perseverance, put my head down. But I would say, I think it came at a very high cost for me personally. I think in the last few years, when I would get termination notices, when my grants were running out, my next one wasn't in, it really bittered me over to a university that I love. I've built an entire career on service to the state. Every grant I've written has been about bettering life for people in our state and in public health. And, it caused some hard edges for me that I think really took away from my joy in my work. And I think therefore took away from what I could give the university. And I love working with students. I love giving back. But I think when the university got into more of a poverty mentality with the cuts and the struggles, and then I think when so many of us, you know, shout out around the pandemic, because all the systems I had in place to help my elders went away. They just evaporated. Even home hospice for my mother was maybe a visit from a nurse every 2 or 3 weeks. We were on our own. You know, I had to, you know, we waited 7 weeks for my father's death certificate in LA, and, you know, 2 weeks for my mother's here in North Carolina, because the doctor couldn't bother to sign the death certificate. So the pandemic, I think, has added burden for everybody in that role, parents and caregivers, just over the top. So then it became even harder for us to hold each other up. Like some of the normal peer supports, I think, were stretched too, because it's like, I got to go get my kids. I can't do that, or I have to wait till they're in bed, or, you know, we really, all of us at some level were pushed. But I think we all lose, Mark. I think we all lose when we don't, I'm of the age, I remember the Covey model, you know, if we don't allow time to move out of the, you know, into the important but not urgent box. I think that's where true creativity as an academic, that's where I really wanted to live and work, was to use my mind and my interests and my curiosity to contribute back. And if we're always in crisis mode, it just really takes away from what we all lose. I believe we all lose by not allowing for that humanity. I have hundreds of hours of leave that I could not take, because you know, if you have to get that report out or that whatever, you can't be off, even if you qualify for family leave. And this is the reality. And this is how it's different, I think, for researchers, academic researchers, than it is maybe for some staff who can have, not that they don't have the same pressure, but there is a level of almost running your own business, you know, where you can't ever really be completely off, that I think it's important to acknowledge. It is different. And, you know, and if we have loved ones in our lives that don't live in that environment, that's going to be hard for them to understand.
Mark, I think I would say too, the other thing is, you mentioned like, how do we change the culture here? And it's really hard to change a culture at an organization that's so large and complex as ours. It's probably hard to change it. It is hard to change culture anywhere. So for me, I think it's like changing the culture in the environment that you can affect, right? So if it's your research team, if it's your center, wherever that is. So for me, one of the things that I do with my research team, but also with my health system team, is we set up some guiding principles, like who are we and what matters to us and how are we going to interact with each other. And we have a retreat where we are very deliberate about talking in these things. So I start all my team meetings with shout outs and concerns, because I believe, because encouragement is a core value for me. And it's important, right, to encourage. So we start that way. With COVID, it's been hard, right? You get all that. We had, I knew people hired during the pandemic, so they may not have ever met other people on the team, and everybody's working virtually. So we started this Wednesdays around the water cooler. And so we all get on Zoom, it's obviously on Zoom, but we call it our Wednesday around the water cooler. And we talk about life outside of here. We don't talk about what's happening with the job, with work, but we try to get to know each other, because I think it's something about that human connection and getting to know people on a personal level that also helps establish. So we are establishing a culture for our team. And I think that is really important in this, because we can wait for some leader of our university to come in who has these as their core principles and operate, but that may or may not ever happen, right? And so I think you just try to figure out how to do it in the areas that you can affect, or at least that's what I landed on.
Yeah, this is Becky White, and Crystal, I am here. I'd like to make a couple of comments, and shout outs. Thanks to Susan and Amelia. I'm so glad you have your program. It's been great. And I was one of the people that didn't get selected, but I was allowed to come and to be there. And I benefited from actually having access to one of their superb research assistants that helped me get an administrative supplement for a grant that was literally a lifeline. So it was I really think highly, and I'm so glad you all are doing this. I got actually 2 comments, and Sherry, I really hear you. I think there are a couple of things I like to add. Number one, and so I'm thinking about this because I'm going to start meeting with some of our infectious disease fellows. I'm an infectious disease physician, and this has been a rough time for all of us. And these are fellows who pretty much grew up during the COVID time. And one of the challenges and concerns I have is that they see the lay of the land, and a lot of them are just kind of opting out. They're like, And so the problem is so I think that there are a lack of role models. I mean, Crystal, I've never heard anybody say what you said. Now, I've read plenty of books, but what you said, it would be great to have very productive people, because they look around at the people who are extremely productive, and the assumption is that's who I have to be. And, instead of kind of, now I understand it's a choice. There's people that this is what some people like to do. They like to, I know that there are some of my colleagues that don't want to be still. And, and some of them are, they have a very different life and help, and they've got somebody else. I mean, I have a young child and a husband, and, if I did some of the things that some of my colleagues would do, I'd come home and my husband would have been gone. So, that just happens to be my life. So one of the things that I definitely think is to really, we need more role modeling that, yes, you can fulfill this and you can be this too. And I agree with that time. You're exactly right on, Crystal, with the time. And I've been doing that too. I've been doing the 1 or 2 things, and then I go right back to the to-do list, check stuff. And then I bring myself back to, great, I had one thing I want to get done. I got it done. And I've read also on that. So, but I think that what Sherry talks about, and it seems to be getting just worse and worse and worse, where we're just, you have the structure that, we're asked to do more and more. And I think that's the challenging issue, is despite all of this, you've got the structure that's kind of moving. It's like a moving, it's like a train, and it's coming and it's continuously. But anyway, regardless of all of that, I feel energized, and I'm grateful. I'm glad y'all had this. And I actually almost didn't come because I thought, I got an hour, I can get this done. And then I said, well, you know what? Let me sharpen the saw. So I'm so glad I came, and I'll get my work done later.
I was just reflecting on what Dr. White said, which is building on Dr. Cena. And I was thinking it's almost like the research tasks are check-offable, and everyone on all 28 people on this call are high achievers who are used to lists and done, and you don't get that same satisfaction because caregiving and other commitments are chaotic, and there's just nothing about emptying the dishwasher doesn't get nearly the kind of cross off. What's that thing, tryptophan hits or whatever, as submitted a review, finally finishing that paper review or whatever. And that's probably part of the calculus, I'm sure. Dopamine, yes, thank you. So Dr. Drake and Dr. Girdler, if I were, you're a bit, Dr. Drake, you should be testifying at the Senate, because your ability to choose your words carefully, but yet conveying a very important message, I think, is commendable. If I were interested in finding out more about any potential grant opportunities that are coming in the near future, how might I find out more about Caregivers at Carolina and be sure to be aware of any new opportunities that arise?
And I'm going to let Susan respond, putting her on the spot, because I've said a lot, but we do this equal. We care for this grant equally. And Becky and Crystal and others, we're not letting you be part of it. You are a big part, and we encourage the cohort to get the steam and energy and support of each other that's been part of it. Go ahead, Susan.
Yeah, thank you for saying that, Amelia, because it's really true. I think maybe, yes, there's some funds that go to some of the physician scientists, but the cohort model where we get together, and we did get together and actually had an in-person lunch just this week for the first time in almost 2 years. And just that connection with others that can really appreciate, the roles that physician scientists have, who are also engaged in substantial caregiving at home. Just to be with others who share the similar experience, I think is definitely proven to be very powerful for our members. And we have over 20 physician scientists who are part of our group. They're not always able to attend the luncheons, but they're always able to participate and have access to the other resources, including the administrative support. So stay tuned. First off, our competitive renewal, which we can talk about, that was funded this last year. We will have another call for applications, submissions in January. So be on the lookout for that. That'll come out in Vital Signs. That'll be advertised in the School of Medicine website. So there'll be plenty of announcements about that. And then this other potential thing, which maybe we can or can't really talk about yet, if it were to come to pass, that will also be advertised the same way. So there'll be plenty, and that is, this potential thing is particularly related to how the pandemic may or may not have increased caregiving demands and therefore impacted research productivity. And the funds, as Amelia said, are not to support physician scientists in caregiving, doesn't pay for caregiving. It supports directly the research of the physician scientists so that in fact they can have more time to be productive, or they can have more time to spend with their loved ones and care for them without their research tanking. So anyway, be on the lookout. It's advertised very, very broadly. And tell your colleagues and friends about it if you see the ad.
Great, we certainly will. Dr. Lombardi, I wanted to reflect on some of the things that you said, and any advice you have for senior mentors and how they can support mentees and junior faculty and junior investigators and other researchers who are right at the 2 month to 2 year age, or having their own caregiving demands as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think what, I was just hearing from others about, talking about it at a team meeting, or, Mark sharing, hey, I'm going to my kid's soccer game, like that, hearing senior faculty who you look up to and who are, productive, acknowledge that they're doing family caregiving, that really does mean a lot. And so, sometimes you'll get a note from someone say, oh, I have to cancel this meeting. But it could be a time where you say, hey, I'm canceling this meeting. I gotta, take my mom to an appointment. Just really does bring in this aspect of you as a senior faculty are human too. And Dr. Sinead, thank you for your vulnerability of saying, that's how time is pervasive for me. And I think having those conversations with your mentees can be really valuable, your thought processes, your thinking. And I would say too, it's kind of like this duality of, I want to be recognized that, I'm caregiving and I'm researching, but I still want to be focused on my work. And so at my previous institution, a lot of times when I would share that I was pregnant, or I share, everyone would talk about at the end of the day, you'll want to be, on your deathbed, you'll think more about the time you spend with your kid than the time you're researching. And you're like, that's not really helpful to me right now because I'm in the middle of this. So, as much as you can, acknowledge people are caregiving and parenting and living life, but that the work is still important and valuable to me. Just because I'm a mom and want to show pictures of my kids doesn't mean I'm not a scientist who's interested in the things that I'm studying. So I know it's kind of a, a tautology, but I think it is something that's really valuable and important. And I, just to reflect what Dr. White was, I have a lot of friends who are kind of at the stage crew that are jumping ship, that are like, this is not academia research, like this is not what is all cracked up to be, which is such a shame, because I think we're losing folks who are really talented and valuable. But like the sign says, that sometimes it feels like you can't enter if you don't play by the rules that someone else has created for you. But yeah, just having this research as part of, this talk as part of a research week, to me, hopefully reflects some sort of movement in a culture. I know culture is hard to shift, like everyone was saying, but just that to me is huge. So.
Mark, can I just mention one more thing? I don't know, I forgot to mention it when I was making some comments. In terms of a tangible resource, in case it's helpful for people. I think I mentioned that I had a preemie, so I went into the hospital at 26 weeks. I remember I was I was a junior faculty, working on my K, was at a grant writers workshop. I don't know if they've done it a couple of times through tracks, and I don't know if they'll probably do it again post-COVID. If you have junior faculty or whatever, definitely do it. It's like the grant writers workshop. I think Becky and I did it together once. It's amazing. And I remember I was at that meeting and had to leave to go for a routine ultrasound during my pregnancy, and got to the ultrasound. They realized I had this problem, short cervix or whatever, got immediately hospitalized, and I could not finish the grant writers workshop. I was so bummed. And it's really, this is like the perverse thing, right? I wasn't even concerned about that, like I'm immediately getting hospitalized because I have this dangerous thing that could cause me to lose the baby. I was thinking, I really need to be at that grant writers workshop because my K is going to be due in a month. But again, this is how sometimes the nature of this work is very perverse in terms of how it shifts your priorities and makes you think, some things are more important. It overinflates the importance of some things and underinflates the importance of others. Never, fast forward to I'm in the hospital and they were like, oh, you're going to have to stay here until you deliver. Well, I was 26 weeks. I'm like, Tool, you mean like 38 weeks? Yes. So I'm in the hospital every day. I'm writing my K. The OBGYNs were coming to round on me. And at some point I said, guys, can you stop rounding on me? I'm fine. I really have got to get my work done. And so I would have my research staff come over and we would sit and they would sit in the hospital while I worked on my K. But that's not the point of the story. The point of the story was to say why it's also important for us to be transparent with our colleagues. I was having a conversation with one of my colleagues way after this. So at this point, my son was probably 3. So I was getting ready to put in an R01. I think it was like maybe year 3 of my K. And I said something about it. And my colleague was like, did you ever take the NIH extension? And I was like, what are you talking about? She's like, for every year, whenever you have a baby, there's a rule with NIH, you get a year that you can extend your ESI status, early stage investigator status. And I was like, what? I didn't know this. She's like, yeah, it's not advertised very much, but just email them. Let them know, because I'm submitting now my first R01. And as you all know, like you want that ESI status for as long as you can get it. And I emailed and it was so simple. It was literally just an email. I was like, just wanted to, I heard about this. Don't know if it's true. Had a baby 3 years ago. Can I take my extension? Absolutely. And apparently you get an extension every year. For every child that you have, you can extend it 1 more year. So I say all that to say there are other resources like that I don't know if it's helpful for any of you or any of your mentees or trainees, but there are things that, again, I wouldn't know. That's the power of connection too, and being honest with people. I would have never known that had my colleague not told me. And so I was able to get this, extension. I ended up not using it because just, for the grace of God, my RO1 was scored very positively. And so I didn't need to actually use my ESI status to get it funded, but that would have been really helpful because I literally was at the end. I was in my 10th year or whatever the ESI is. And so had it not been scored well, that would have been just enough to help me have chance to resubmit. So that's a good resource if anybody needs to use it.
If you have twins, do you get 2 years?
Yeah, maybe, that's a good question. Like they weren't born exactly at the same time. I think it should count.
Dr. Green, you mentioned using your advocacy skills from your professional skill set in a personal setting. And I jotted down, is that bucket filling or bucket draining? I know like during COVID, when during the initial part of the pandemic, I'm like, well, I got nothing I can contribute. But once I realized, okay, I have something that I can bring to the table, at least from an analysis standpoint, it gave me some energy. I was actually doing something. But there were also days where I'm like, I just feel like I'm doing the same thing all the time. Any thoughts on, when your professional skill set is entering your personal life, how you keep that blend and yet remaining sane, I guess.
Well, I think like Dr. Lombardi, I have the social work training, but also my public health skills, and I think it made a big difference for me. I didn't set out like, I didn't tell the doctors, oh, I'm Dr. Green, because I didn't want them to misconstrue that I was a medical doctor. So, but I could speak, I always did my research. And so I clearly spoke with some knowledge and authority. And I think it made all the difference for my family members. And I think it also exposed me as a public health researcher to the vulnerability of the people who didn't have advocates. So I think, like Trax talks about bench to bedside and bedside to bench. And so I think in my personal and professional life, I've been living that. And I've been taking that lived experience and letting that inform my research. That's how I ended up with the nursing home grant. And I think that, when I'm speaking with a primary care provider on behalf of a family member, and we start talking about the opioid epidemic, and they find out that, that's one of the areas I work in. Not only do they see me differently, but it's a chance for me to tell them about opportunities and resources. So I believe for me, it was a bucket filling experience because, I did take that seriously, that bridging back and forth. I always carried with me in my trunk, literature from our ECHO opioid project. So if I ran into somebody in the hospital or whatever, and they started asking me questions, I would give them a flyer, even if it meant referring them to a collaborating center, because I was in Western North Carolina. So I think all those things are useful. And I want to stress again what Dr. Lombardi said. I think having senior leaders, Mark, your example, and others, our department chairs and our leaders, actually role model some, whatever that elusive, Crystal, that elucidate, Dr. Sine, life work balance, just that the importance of those joyous times with family. I think they should be seen as a rich injection of life and positivity to our work, not as a distraction from. And I think the culture has been, we don't talk about those, and they're seen as a distraction from or a competition with, and they're anything but that. I think that we need to celebrate them. And I certainly, when I worked with mentees, doctoral students, I celebrated their new motherhood or whatever and said, take time, we'll make it work. We'll flex your time and make it work, because in the end, it does improve what we do.
Crystal.
Mark, I will say to that point, for me, being a caregiver and being a doctor was it was both. It was bucket filling. I mean, I felt honored to be able to advocate in that way, but it was also highly stressful. And I don't know if it's because I'm a medical doctor and feeling like, because people do have these expectations, right? That because you know something or whatever, you understand, and you don't get to just be a family member. And sometimes it's important to just be able to be. It's important to be able to advocate. I've loved having enough knowledge or enough connections to be able to do that. But just as an example, and I'll say this for those, especially for clinicians who are on the Zoom, it's important to let our colleagues who we encounter, when they're there in the role as family members, let them be family members. When my son was in the NICU, the NICU attending, he was having all these problems, but he'd been in the NICU for a long time. And at one point, the NICU attending said to me, you know what? And he needs to get out. It's time for him to go. And you're a doctor. You can resuscitate him at home if he codes. And I actually thought, okay, maybe I guess I could. Even I'm not a pediatrician. I take care of adults, right? But that was so startling for me. But I thought, well, maybe I am being not unreasonable. Maybe I should be pushing for him to leave the NICU. And the importance, again, of an advocate. The nurses were irate who heard him say that. They went to the NICU director because they said, she is not here as a doctor. She is here with a critically ill child. And although he's bigger, he's in a swing and the other babies are in an incubator. He's in a swing, but he stops breathing at any minute and it's unpredictable. And she needs to be able to get to be a mom while she's here, not be a doctor. And so they advocated for me and they pushed. But so I do think that position is a double-edged sword. It comes with a lot of benefits and access, but it can be burdened. So I always remember that experience when I'm dealing with colleagues who are clinicians, and even our colleagues who are PhDs, they have knowledge or whatever, but let them be the primary role that they're in, let them be part of that primary network. So if they're family, let them be family and don't have expectations of them, because it's hard. It was really hard for me.
Dr. Girdler?
Yeah, I wanted, so as part of the application to the Caregivers program to receive the research supplement funding, we ask for a brief description of caregiving demands. And the people who get the funding, it isn't based on hardship of your caregiving. That is not the most important thing. But yet we do want to understand, how is your caregiving experience impacting your research productivity? Anyway, to the points that have already been raised, Amelia would back me up on this. Almost all or many of the physician scientists who apply talk about this sort of extra role, this extra burden, this kind of bucket draining of being a physician. And therefore, because you have medical knowledge, there's this greater expectation that you will serve all these other roles as advocacy. You'll make the medical decisions for all your family members. And so it is just another layer of, complexity for the physician scientists in terms of impact on their research and their time and their just overall workload, if you will, even though they love their family members. And of course they want to provide medical care and advocate and all of this, but it's just, I had never really appreciated it until I read all of these applications.
Dr. Drake?
I feel like I should take my hand down because I'm not sure that I'm going to say this as well as other things, but just that we recognize that we can't cover everyone, or even people outside of the constraints of a certain grant funding agency who doesn't really want to support animal research per the will of Doris Duke, for example. It's supposed to be clinical. It's, we go through a lot of hoops to get the people funded that we do, and then the help to the people who maybe didn't get the primary money, but benefit with the manuscript editing, et cetera. We recognize this is a small, tiny little drop in the ocean. However, I think the thing that's made Susan and me continue with this, you know, I'm an ear, nose, and throat doctor. I take care of tonsillitis, and, you know, the idea of helping this medical school get, I think we can talk about it next on November 17th, that'll be $1.5 million, you know, 500,000 plus, because each is a little more than that, to help at least start this conversation. The fact that funding agencies are even have the word caregiving in it. Sherry, I wish we could turn around and say, you know, thank you for your 19 years of effort for the elderly, because I know that's like. I was very involved with my own parents, and then, oh, who knew a mother-in-law whose daughter really couldn't do this, needed to come live with us in her final, you know, days, weeks. So I'm just glad the conversation, just like you, Mark, saying, I think it's so powerful for your trainees to hear that you wanted to be with your son's soccer. That is huge. That's the conversation that we're talking about. And I feel the same of our small efforts in the caregiving grant.
It feels like a great place to basically wrap up. I think you really hit the nail there. So, and I think we're all kind of wondering November 17th, you know, at least those who might be eligible for that. So thanks everyone for joining us today. I always like to finish a little early to let people grab, hopefully you don't have a 4:30 meeting, but you know, just a little bit of an opportunity to catch that. I wanted to thank all our panelists. It was really a great discussion that was free ranging and hit a lot of themes of things that I've been busy jotting down notes, and some really great ideas and thoughts and comments. And so I appreciate your time and willingness to share, but to say some of the things that people don't say aloud. And I think it's a great opportunity for some leadership there. So thanks everyone for joining, and I hope you participate in other activities for University Research Week, and have a good last couple days of the week. Take care.